For a while now, the standard advice in the Rise of Kingdoms community is that crafting pieces like this one here, the Cape of the War God that add attack to your march, is not a good idea. But in this video, I'm going to tell you when it might actually be a good idea and why sometimes that advice is misguided. So stick around. What's up, everybody? Psych out here with the Rise of Kingdoms video. The standard mantra in Rise of Kingdoms these days is to avoid any kind of buffs to attack. No city skins with attack, no equipment pieces, none of these pieces of gear with attack. You don't want to craft pieces like Cape of the War God. You don't want to craft pieces like Shadow Legion Retribution. That's a waste of legendary materials. I'm going to give a little bit of history on where this advice comes from and why, in general, it has been good advice. But I'm also going to talk about specific situations where it is bad advice, and it's actually advice that has gone too far in the wrong direction. So I want to start with a little bit of the history here. A long time ago, I think it's, more than 2 years ago in Rise of Kingdoms, when the meta march, the meta rally march was Attila Takeda. That was the march used for everything, used for rallying garrisons, used for rallying cities, flags, everything. When that march was Attila Takeda, one of the ideas behind that was to stack attack. That is, you would put as many attack pieces of gear as you could. You want to have an attack city skin. You want to have an attack buff. Everything you could do, you want to do a stack attack on that march. And this seemed like the standard play. Everyone was doing this at the time. And it turns out that that was wrong. That was actually bad. And a lot of people did some analyses and they found out that this is incorrect. You don't actually want to stack attack on that march. And the reason for that, well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the core reason for it has to do with the rock battle formula. Now, I'll put a card at the top. I've talked about this in another video, how the battle formula works. It's much more complicated than I'm going to make it here. So if you want to check that out, you can check out that video if you want to see all the details. But for here, let's just make it really, really simple. Essentially, in a battle, the amount of damage you do is the number of troops in your march times the amount of attack, the total attack that your troops have, which is your base attack times all of the buffs, right? That's your total attack times the number of troops. That's how much damage you're going to be outputting. And the amount of damage that you take is mitigated by your defense times your health. And that is your total defense times your total health. So you have your base health and you have your base defense and you multiply them times their buffs, whatever multipliers they have. And then you multiply them together. Now, there's a couple of implications here. One of the implications is that you want to have health and defense relatively balanced. That is, let's say your defense is at 50 and your health is at 49, and you can add 1 point to your either defense or health. You should choose health in that case because it gives you 50-50. And when you multiply that and get 250, that is better than, well, not 250, 2,500. That is better than 51 times 49, which I don't know what that is, but you can do the math yourself and you'll see that it's actually better. That is, if the numbers are relatively even, you get a better total defense mitigation. So that's why you want to balance defense and health. Now, the advice for a really long time has been to give health. And the reason for that, you can actually see most clearly if you go to your city hall and you check out your stats. I'm in the home kingdom right now, so most of this will apply to anybody who's not in Season of Conquest. I'll come back to Season of Conquest technology here in a minute. But if we just look at, like, for example, let's just look at infantry. We can see I have 95% total attack. That comes from our alliance technology. We have a max alliance. That comes from my own personal technology, max personal technology. Building, which I think is one of the, I forget which building it is that gives 2% attack to all of your troops. Maybe it's it's one of the military buildings. Holy Site giving 3% attack and VIP giving 5% attack. Now let's go down to defense. So right, we're talking 95% there. If we go down to defense, we're going to see that it's 103%. The only difference here is this 8% city theme. So let's go ahead and cut that out. We're actually at the exact same 95%. If I took the city theme off, we would still be at 95% there. But if we go down to health, that's when the story gets really interesting. We see we're at a paltry 53% health. And the reason for this is that there's just not as many buffs for health, right? We get some stuff from the hospitals and we get some technology, but even the technology is not as high. And we don't get as much from a holy site. So health has always been the premier stat to give. If you had to choose what stat to add, you wanted to add the health because that would balance the health and the defense. And the other reason to do that is because Historically, a lot of marches have given attack. Now, you don't really need attack to be in balance with health and defense, but it just turns out because marches had so much attack, there was actually more benefits in adding to health and defense than there was to adding to attack. And let me give you an example of that, and we'll just go back to the example I used earlier, which is Attila Takeda. I actually don't have Attila unlocked, so we have to scroll all the way down here. But we can see that his first skill it's add normal attack damage, but those don't matter. Damage bonuses don't matter for the discussion we're having here. These also don't matter for this discussion. What matters most importantly for this discussion is this one here, cavalry attack bonus. Attila adds 40% to your base attack. So he's adding a whole bunch of attack. I don't think he adds any defense. No, he just adds all kinds of damage bonuses, and he adds a 40% attack bonus. So you're already getting a big benefit of attack. And the point here is that every percentage point increase you add to a stat has diminishing returns, right? So there's less value on that. So Attila has a ton of attack. And now let's go over to Takeda, who does have some tankiness. He does have some skill damage reduction. He also, and this is the key one here, he also has a 40% attack. So Attila Takeda, that meta march at the time, had an 80% attack bonus. So when people were testing and saying, hey, which equipment's really best, and they were testing on this march, usually in rallies, they actually found out that adding to health is the most valuable. And the reason for that is because, again, health is so low to start, and the march already has a tremendous amount of attack. Now, I'm going to come back to that point here in a second. Now, another important point to keep in mind with Attila Takeda is that it doesn't do any skill damage at all. And that's really important when we're talking about the consideration of attack versus health versus defense versus which pieces to craft. And additionally, because it doesn't do any skill damage at all, it also doesn't have any AoE damage effects. And that turns out to be really, really important. So the next thing I want to talk about is Season of Conquest technology. That's another reason why attack sort of gets a bad rap. In the Season of Conquest, you can add like 40-something%, I think it's 42% attack total to your marches. And so, or maybe it's just 40%. Anyway, you can add a bunch of attack to your marches, and that's it. If you get max crystal technology, you add a bunch of attack. You don't add any defense. You don't add any health. So again, because of the diminishing returns on attack, it is actually more valuable in many scenarios to add health and defense. But all of that has changed recently for a couple of reasons. Number one is because marches have changed. We're not running marches like Attila Takeda or Richard or Charles Martel that don't do skill damage. Now we're much more likely to run lots of marches that do skill damage. For example, we run Nevsky, who does a huge skill damage factor. And the reason this matters is because attack is also figured into the skill damage formula. So it's your troops, your attack, that total attack number that you get impacts how much skill damage you output. So when you add attack, you're not just adding to your attacks and counterattacks, you're also adding to skill damage. And this becomes really, really important if we're using commanders like Joan of Arc that do AoE skill damage. So a lot of times in these analyses, when we look at 1v1 kind of tests, we see, wow, it's better to add to health. But that doesn't take into account the fact that AoE skill damage, like Joan of Arc's, does damage to 3 targets. And all of those get buffed with attack. So adding to attack actually increases the damage it does to all of those targets, not just the single target that you're fighting. So that's one reason why attack gets a bad rap, is because most of the testing is done in these sort of 1v1 scenarios, and it doesn't take into account the AoE value of adding to attack. And I've talked about this in another video. I talked about, and I'll put a card at the top for this video as well. It looks like Reset is here. Well, that's fantastic. But I want to show you that this video that I did on civilizations. I looked at Japan and found out that Japan is surprisingly strong even in the Season of Conquest. And one of the reasons they're surprisingly strong is because of this special unit, the Samurai here. It has, at T4, 202 attack, but the T5 unit has 232 base attack. So when you add Season of Conquest technology, when you add other kinds of attack gear and other kinds of attack pieces, and you start factoring in AoE value, the samurai actually do quite well. Now, I still would advise you to go Japan because you're really only talking about buffing your infantry marches, these royal samurai. You're also only getting 3% attack here. I would still advise you to go to Ottoman. Ottoman's a better choice just because you get buffs to all troops in terms of march speed, and you get that skill damage buff to all of your troops. So it's not just infantry. But if you're only going to run infantry, Japan, again, most people think of that as a farming civilization, actually does quite well in the sense that when you have AoE skill damage marches, it's pumping out a ton of AoE skill damage. And that's really important in murder ball situations. That's also really important in Ark of Osiris midfights. By the way, in Ark of Osiris or Osiris League midfights, you don't have any of those Season of Conquest buffs. So again, the value of attack goes up more in those scenarios where you're really counting on AoE skill damage and wanting to buff that up as much as you can so that you can clear the field. So the point here is that in certain situations, you're not that worried about taking good trades. You're worried about wiping the field as fast as possible, getting as much value out of AoE skill damage as you can. So that's one reason why attack is a little bit undersold. That's one extra value of attack that I think a lot of people don't realize is its additive value to AoE skill damage. A second reason that attack is sort of back in, or I think, again, not given the credit that it should be due, is because of the changes to commanders. Remember, Attila Takeda had 80% attack, and a lot of commanders have a lot of attack. Guan Yu has a lot of attack, like which is his skill here. No, it's not that one. What is it here? Okay, here it is. So he's got 30% infantry attack. So that was a pretty common commander. Alexander the Great has another, what does he have? He's got another 30% attack. So you're getting 60% attack there. Plus you're getting some attack bonus, some percentage of the time. That march has a ton of attack, a little bit of defense, no health. So again, on that march, maybe it makes sense to add more health. But some of the newer marches that have come into the game, like Alexander Nevsky, one of the best marches in the game is Nevsky with Joan of Arc, actually adds quite a bit of health. And again, I can't remember where these stats are. There it is. So this one adds 20% of health, and I know it's on his expertise, that you get another 30% of health for some period of time. There's a little bit of a cooldown. But the point is, this march actually adds quite a bit of health. And if we add that with a Joan of Arc, or Joan of Arc Prime rather, we also see that she adds another 10% of health as well. So this march actually gets quite a bit more health than some of the other stats. And when we add that to some of the most common pieces that we see, like, well, let's imagine that you have a health city skin for calves, but let's also look at some of our cav gear. Actually, this isn't the easiest place to do it. Let me jump over to my XY. We see that like pieces like this have a lot of health. We see that pieces like this have health. Pieces like this have health. Pieces like this have health. A lot of health on these cavalry march to the point that you can actually get health higher than your defense. A very unusual scenario, but it actually does happen with certain cavalry setups that you can have health that is higher than your defense, in which case you would rather start adding points to defense, or, and the point of this video, you might rather add those points to attack, particularly if it is a march that does a lot of skill damage and has big AoE value like XY does. Look, that's it for this video. I hope you learned something. I hope you liked the video. If you did, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for coming by, everybody, and I will see you in the next one.